Welcome back to Night School, episode 3, or lecture 3, or dialogue 3, whatever it is we're calling this. And we're back.
No, this is 4. Isn't it 4th?
Is it 4? I'm sorry.
We did 3 on Raven, I think.
We've been so productive this week that I can't even remember which episode we're on. You're right. We had a trilogy on the Raven, and now this is episode 4. Yeah, so welcome back to Night School, episode 4. And hopefully that's a Felix Culpa right there, and it inspires me like one who practices poorly but plays well to get up to the right level to do this. So today we're talking about Song of Myself, the 1892 version, which can be found on poetryfoundation.org. And in fact, I will share my screen right now so that you can see it if you're on YouTube. If not, I recommend that you look along. You can find this at Song of Myself, 1892 version, and type in Poetry Foundation after that in a search engine, probably Google, and you can follow along with us. And we were thinking about going a part at a time. And, well, Wes, even before we did start, we were talking about the structural elements of poetry last time, and something I noticed trying to sort of lesson plan how many of these lectures to have was that there are 52 parts.
Yeah.
Which makes me connect this to the 52 weeks in the year, and that this is a song of one's entire self, or oneself temporally spaced across time, an entire year. That's like one's entire existence.
It seems like a kind of version of a devotional poem in a way then too, right? It's like the sort of thing where you read a bit of a religious text or some kind of thoughts about that text every day, or once a week, right? You know, on your holy day, you do that throughout the year and mark the time that way too. Of course, his religion seems to be, as he says, himself.
Yeah, and it's interesting to what extent, if he is making a comment on how one's existence can be sectioned into parts, either temporal or spatial, in the case of poetry. To what extent it is the atomized moments in time that are you, or the generalized structure that those moments take over time. And I wonder to what extent that's the question of poetry too. It's not about the specific words being used, but the structure that it attains towards in the end, or that it does attain, because it is poetry. That poetry is supposed to represent sort of like a well-structured, well-lived life in that way.
Yeah. Well, the word atom does appear right there in the third line rather, and the line lengths vary, right? And the rhythm varies. There isn't an obvious rhyme scheme or anything like that. So yeah, clearly there's a totally different kind of structural principle here. And maybe it is a little more kind of psychological, a little more open to interpretation, even in terms of its form, than something like the Raven, which has such a rigid and bouncing sort of scheme to it.
Right, right. Indicating maybe a situation in time, whereas this is supposed to be a representation of like a living person, something far more complicated and fluid.
Yeah.
Well, would you like to read the first part, Wes?
Okay. Yeah, let's dig into this because it's a doozy. All right, so Song of Myself, 1892 version by Walt Whitman. 1. I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. My tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air, born here of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same, I, now 37 years old in perfect health, began, hoping to cease not till death. Creeds and schools in abeyance, retiring back a while, sufficed at what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor for good or bad, I permit to speak at every hazard, nature without check, with original energy.
All right, well, the first thing I notice is like you were saying with the structure, there are 4 stanzas in this first part, which is going to be different even from the very second stanza. The lines themselves differ in length and don't appear to have a rhyme scheme, and each stanza even differs in how many lines it has in it. And so just 2 things or 3 things about it immediately. I celebrate myself and sing myself. That's immediately alerting me to an epic convention in this poem and to the poet's intention towards an epic sort of scope. Because the very first line of Virgil's Aeneid is, I sing of arms and of a man. Cano, arma virumque, Troia ab primus, or I might have forgotten the ab prima or something like that. And yeah. And Homer in the Iliad, it is sing to me, muse, the wrath of Achilles, or Peleus' son Achilles.
Right.
And so the idea of a song or of singing something of epic scope, of heroic scope, he seems to be aligning himself with that tradition, as well as aligning himself with a sort of naturalist rather than deist tradition. Yeah, as you mentioned in the 3rd line, and then again in the 6th line, he mentions atoms, and he's mentioning natural things like summer grass, blood, parents, soil, air, even perfect health and his age, and then mentioning death. But also in that last line, nature without check, with original energy. That's very much where, like, sort of, well, part of the singing aspect of an epic is an invocation to the muse.
Yes.
And so what this seems to be missing is precisely that. There is no invocation to something divine, but there is nature sort of reified. Nature is sort of taking the place of the Virgin Mary, you might say, that as the great mother from whom all things come. It's as if you can see the transition of a symbolic language from the language of Christianity to the language of science in this first part.
Yeah, I think that nature and nature is not something that's separate from the poet, though, right? Because if there is a muse, it's himself, right? He celebrates himself and sings himself. So he takes Virgil a step further. He takes Dante a step further, right? He doesn't have a muse that's external to himself. The muse is immanent in him, right? And he is, flowing through it, exchanging atoms with it and with the reader as well. He addresses the reader directly, which I always kind of find real interesting when the speaker shifts into the second person voice, and so he distinguishes, I and the reader, you. He distinguishes his soul, right? His tongue. All these sort of, they're sort of all equivalent, though, right? It's very democratic. Parents and parents, the same, right? The same. There's this kind of hearkening back to a kind of epic tradition, but very different in its approach, right? He says the creeds and schools in abeyance, right? He's got them in there. He knows about the stuff that you're talking about, all the old poets, but he keeps them sort of back. He'd rather have nature and original energy be the foreground here. It's a really stirring opening, and has a cool tension between that tradition and that originality.
And I love that, because what's interesting is that when you look at the tradition, the medieval tradition, and sort of the great books tradition, one of the criticisms is often that contemporary poetry, in some way is responsible for answering the tradition that's been set before it. But that it's not actually the case that that's what any of those epic poets say. Dante, for instance, says that God is the father of nature, which is the father of art, indicating that the great teacher of the artist is nature. Completely agreeing with Walt Whitman several centuries before him, 5 centuries before him. And so it is interesting that the tradition, I feel like, sometimes gets some flack for requirements that it does not, that the participants within it do not actually require. Or,
yeah,
it's interesting. It's perhaps that's actually part of being, a part of a tradition, that you don't. But there does seem to be a linking that's necessary as well, and perhaps that's part of the Adam belonging to me as good belongs to you.
mm-hmm.
Well, anything else in that first one? How do you think the word loaf is being used there? Is that?
I like it. I mean, there's some definite alliteration with it, right? I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf. Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of affectation of naturalness in a way, right? It's like, look how calm and cool I am loafing here, spitting this beautiful poetry, so easily, so offhandedly. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, well, on to 2. Houses and rooms are full of perfumes. The shelves are crowded with perfumes. I breathe the fragrance myself and know it and like it. The distillation would intoxicate me also, but I shall not let it. The atmosphere is not a perfume. It has no taste of the distillation. It is odorless. It is for my mouth forever. I am in love with it. I will go to the bank by the wood and become undisguised and naked. I'm mad for it to be in contact with me. The smoke of my own breath, echoes, ripples, buzzed, whispers, love root, silk thread, crotch and vine, my respiration and inspiration, the beating of my heart, the passing of blood and air through the lungs, the sniff of green leaves and dry leaves, and of the shore and the dark-colored sea rocks, and of hay in the barn, the sound of the belched words of my voice loose to the eddies of the wind, a few light kisses, a few embraces, a reaching around of arms, the play of shine and shade on the trees as the supple boughs wag, the delight alone or in the rush of the streets or along the fields and hillsides, the feeling of health, the full noon trill, the song of me rising from my bed and meeting the sun. Have you reckoned 1,000 acres much? Have you reckoned the earth much? Have you practiced so long to learn to read? Have you felt so proud to get at the meaning of poems? Sup this day and night with me, and you shall possess the origin of all poems. You shall possess the good of the earth and sun. There are millions of suns left. You shall no longer take things at second or third hand, nor look through the eyes of the dead, nor feed on the specters in books. You shall not look through my eyes either, nor take things from me. You shall listen to all sides and filter them from yourself. Wow.
Yeah, so again, so we get, just as each line is different and each stanza is different. Now, from part 1 to part 2, there's no apparent pattern just yet, at least. He's got a total shift in the setting, right? He places us, first of all, in houses and rooms, and there's a first hint, I guess, of a kind of rhyme, their internal rhyme, full of perfumes, repetition of that word, perfumes, and I take this to be a kind of flirting with more elegant and more artificial poetry, right? We're in an interior and we're perfumed, but then we move pretty quickly, all over the place from there. We don't, like in The Raven, we stay in one place, and that's key to the poem. And in this poem, we move all around, and that's key, I guess, to this poem. How from one line to the next, we jump from smelling perfumes to a kind of openness of the atmosphere, of the outdoors, of the wood. We hear about, again, the internal nature of the body, and then of the interplay of more than one body, it sounds like, right? Exchanging kisses and embraces. The fields and the hillsides and the streets, right? So it's not like the romantics in England who are all about sort of getting out into the countryside. It's that, but it's also the allure of people all around you, right? In the streets. It's urban and rural. And then he again addresses the reader directly with these questions, right? He's kind of got these rhetorical, almost like challenges, right, to the reader. Have you felt so proud to get at the meaning of poems? And then he makes this boast, right? Stay with me and I'll teach you, right? I'll show you something, and it's not coming right through me exactly, but through yourself. And that's quite an interesting sort of boast, to at once challenge, invite, and in a way like make this kind of Zen aha moment happen for the interlocutor, the reader.
Yeah, it seems like the point is to teach the reader how to express himself rather
Yeah.
than some other self. And that if he follows this master, like Dante followed Virgil to the top of the Purgatorio, his will be freed by acquisition of the art of articulating himself. And thus, in sort of a Heideggerian way, the house of his being will be fitted precisely to his being. And thus he'll have, he'll equilibrate, as the Piagetians would say. And so, well, that's pretty interesting. Well, there just a couple things about that. I thought that was very good. I was wondering if you thought the intoxication that he was afraid of perfumes causing to him in the first stanza was the intoxication that he seems to take on in his experience of nature in the third stanza. The smoke of my own breath. It reads so fast. Lots of commas, very few periods. Echoes, ripples, buzzed, whispers, love root, silk thread, crotch and vine. My respiration and inspiration. There you go. His breath and the beating of his heart, the passing of his blood through, through his lungs. The sniff of green leaves. It's all too much, right? Too much, right? It is as if he is intoxicated, but by nature rather than the artifice,
right,
of man. It's as if this is how you're supposed to express yourself. This is honest language. This is the expression of your nature, the intoxicating Dionysian outpouring, rather than the sort of artificial Apollinian structuring of it in a rigid way.
Yeah, well, like, again, to go back to the Raven, there's that line about quaffing the nepenthe, right?
Right.
And that's a kind of a rejection of pain, and it's a medicine in a sense, right? And the intoxication here is not at all like that. Well, sorry, the intoxication in line 3 of part 2 here maybe is something like that, right? Like this artificial thing that would intoxicate me. I won't let it. Instead, right, there's this other thing that I am in love with, and I'm going to tell you what that thing is, and you'll be in love with it too, So it's a kind of natural high or something like that, right?
Yeah, and I like that, as you said, it doesn't have that romantic return to nature aspect. It has a all-encompassing aspects of nature, both inside and out, because the feeling of health, delight, alone or in the rush of the streets, like you said, the song of me rising from my bed, that's him. That's not just caterpillars and monkeys and trees, and streams, idyllically. He's also very much a part of nature. And, so he's singing about himself and the nature within himself, because as part of nature, he deserves to be represented and to be represented honestly. And perhaps that's what he's saying for all of us. That's what we should all be doing.
Yeah. Yeah, he clearly thinks of himself as a kind of model and mirror for people to learn from. Yeah. I want to go on. Let's keep going. Let's keep rolling, because one of the major aspects of this poem is its kind of that listing, that outflowing, sort of carrying you along sort of thing. It does it in a very different way from the Raven, though, which has its way of doing that too. All right, so part 3. I have heard what the talkers were talking, the talk of the beginning and the end, but I do not talk of the beginning or the end. There was never any more inception than there is now, nor any more youth or age than there is now, and will never be any more perfection than there is now, nor any more heaven or hell than there is now. Urge and urge and urge, always the procreant urge of the world. Out of the dimness, opposite equals advance, always substance and increase, always sex, always a knit of identity, always distinction, always a breed of life. To elaborate is no avail, learned and unlearned feel that it is so. Sure as the most certain sure, plumb in the uprights, well entreated, braced in the beams, stout as a horse, affectionate, haughty, electrical, I and this mystery here we stand. Clear and sweet is my soul, and clear and sweet is all that is not my soul. Lack one lacks both, and the unseen is proved by the seen, till that becomes unseen and receives proof in its turn. Showing the best and dividing it from the worst, age vexes age. Knowing the perfect fitness and equanimity of things, while they discuss I am silent, and go bathe and admire myself. Welcome is every organ and attribute of me, and of any man hardy and clean. Not an inch nor particle of an inch is vile, and none shall be less familiar than the rest. I am satisfied. I see, dance, laugh, sing, as the hugging and loving bedfellow sleeps at my side through the night, and withdraws at the peep of the day with stealthy tread, leaving me baskets covered with white towels swelling the house with their plenty. Shall I postpone my acceptation and realization and scream at my eyes, that they turn from gazing after and down the road, and forthwith cipher and show me to assent exactly the value of one and exactly the value of two, and which is ahead?
Wow. So 3, that's quite a bit. It's as if he's finally starting what he says he's setting out to do in the second stanza, that he makes the claim that he's going to be able to teach us the song of essentially ourselves. And so he sets out with a poem that sort of tells us a short story from the perspective of what seems like an enthusiastic young man who has to move out into the world and is questioning exactly, what the future holds for him. So if we just look at it closely, I've heard what the talkers were talking. So it's like he's past education time now. The talk of the beginning and the end. So he's heard what other people have to say. But I do not talk of the beginning or the end. Okay, and so this does seem to be Whitman. And so he's saying that he's going to talk about the now. And he repeats that 4 times at the end of the second stanza. And that is logically what I would have deduced from the first 2 lines where he would have gone with it. But he's going to talk about being rather than the beginning of being or the end of being, that which is speculative. He's like a phenomenologist in this case. And even kind of shows his recognition of the coming of affective neuroscience with urge and urge and urge, like motivational states within the world. That which used to be gods, right? Ares, aggression, Aphrodite, lust, primary motivations. Now we know they're within, not outside us, but they're just as powerful. And so always the procreant urge of the world. Even Hera can seduce the great powerful Zeus when she needs to in the Iliad. Out of the diddenness, opposite equals advance. Always substance and increase, always sex. Yes, so these seem to be the principles of nature, right, that are coming to replace the old gods. Instead of anthropomorphized or theriomorphized gods, we now have like sort of scientific and economic principles which govern our reality. And out of the dimness, right, that's like the Middle Ages. That's the old times when we didn't know what was happening. Opposite equals advance. And so we're coming at this from different angles, perhaps poetry and science at the same time. Always substance and increase. That's one of those principles of nature or economics. Substance, that means something real, leads to increase. Like you actually have to have a product. Always sex. Well, that's always true because we know we're talking about nature here and things are procreative and things are productive. And so perhaps that's what he's saying here. Substance and increase means equals production or valuable production. Always a net of identity, always distinction, always a breed of life. Okay. And to elaborate is no avail, learned and unlearned, feel that it is so. So he's said all he needs to say about this. It just is as it is. Sure as the most certain, sure upon the uprights, well entreated, braced in the beams, stout as a horse, affectionate, haughty, electrical. I in this mystery, here we stand. What do you do with that, Wes? And maybe I could let you just start jumping in here because I feel like I'm going line by line here, and I don't want to go too slowly.
Yeah, I think the images here are of like builders, right? This kind of architectural thing, but also animal, right? Stout as a horse. And so he invites you to consider that is a picture of him and this mystery. This mystery, I guess, as you're saying, is what it is to be alive or something like that, right? To be in the world.
The now.
Yeah, and
you don't need to explain it. You need to experience it.
Yeah, and I think I would go back though to the beginning and the end. I think that, and then heaven and hell. That's pretty clearly like him taking on religion. Yeah, and
Yeah.
saying that that is not his approach here. He's got a much more holistic kind of felt experience that he's concerned with. Um, the the sex is clearly a really important thing for him, right? And that's, I think, part of why um, the religious, right, the restrictions of religion are not for him. Uh, that's kind of where the short story goes to, right? Is him and his bedfellow, um, and he's, in terms of celebrating himself, that definitely is going to include the body, and the body is going to include, right, every organ. Okay, so we know exactly what he means. Then the long last question here, um, I'm that's the part that I'm most confused by, I think, right now. Um, is I guess he's sort of using it again as a rhetorical question, and I take it to be his characterization of the religious authorities, right? Those who would have him, pluck out your eye if it offends you, sort of thing, right? You want me to scream at my eyes for gazing after this person who I slept with, and care about exactly like how much, um, how much this is worth, or something like that. When what matters seems to be the feeling, the experience itself. So again, I guess it's like a throwing down the gauntlet kind of thing. And I think you're right that it's a poetic, scientific um, approach, which is at pains to demarcate itself from the old religious approach.
And so I was understanding that sort of from a poetic epic perspective, sort of a desire to forge out new land for himself while also being in line with the tradition, sort of like what Milton does when he joins his poetry to the age after Galileo during the scientific revolution, when humans lost their place in the universe. In the same way that Dante harks back to Rome and Virgil by talking about the fractured state of Florence and what Rome has become. I saw him doing that. But I also wonder, is a potential aspect of this poem sort of an autobiographical aspect that would make him motivated to want to interpret it in a more naturalistic or valueless way than in a religious, ethical way? Is he going against one of the values of his time and trying to post hoc justify it?
That's a possibility. I mean, he doesn't seem to feel any guilt, but again, this is the speaker, and the speaker is a creation of Whitman's over a long, long period. Like, this is the 92 version. He had first released this poem in 55.
Oh, wow.
So he worked on it for at least 40 years.
Okay. Right? This is the song of his self.
Yes, it grew with him over that long period. To what extent he's, working out some actual guilt or something like that is a good question.
But it's interesting that he doesn't mention guilt, and guilt would seem to be the natural aspect of, like, say, an angel coming to tell you did something wrong or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's not external, it's an internal feeling that you get from an action you committed. Mm-hmm. And so that would strike me as, if he felt guilt and was attempting to justify what he had done by naturalistic language versus, or as opposed to religious language, I would be far more inclined to my initial interpretation. But since he doesn't, he says, I see, I dance, I laugh, I sing. So he seems to be good,
Yeah.
And he seems to say that that's the measure of good being good. I mean, yeah. I mean, is that I always forget whether it's Pythagoras or Parmenides who says that man is the measure of all things.
I think it's Pythagoras. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that sounds right. But yeah, and he seems to be agreeing with that. And again, this sort of existential or phenomenologist way that if he feels good, He must be good.
Yeah.
And well, I guess you just have to know what feeling good really means.
That is, Protagoras. There we go.
Protagoras. There we go.
Man,
mixture of the two names.
Can't be getting that wrong. All right.
That's right.
One more?
Yeah, I think we're just at 30 now. So one more. Yeah, this one's a short one. And I guess I'm up. Trippers and askers surround me. People I meet, the effect upon me of my early life, or the ward and city I live in, or the nation. The latest dates, discoveries, inventions, societies, authors old and new. My dinner dress, associates' looks, compliments, stews. The real or fancied indifference of some man or woman I love. The sickness of one of my folks or of myself, or ill-doing or loss of lack of money, or depressions or exaltations, battles. The horrors of fratricidal war, the fever of doubtful news, the fitful events. These come to me days and nights and go from me again, but they are not the me myself. Apart from the pulling and hauling stands what I am, stands amused, complacent, compassionate, teen, idle, unitary, looks down, is erect, or bends an arm on an impalpable certain rest, looking with side curved head, curious what will come next, both in and out of the game and watching and wondering at it. Backward I see in my own days where I sweated through fog with linguists and contenders. I have no mockings or arguments. I witness and wait. All right. You can get this on screen too.
I take these to be the trippers and askers, right? All of these negative or overly seemingly positive things, which could trip you up, right? Or could cause you to doubt this all-powerful feeling of being good, right? And it's interesting because I think it sort of answers those questions we were asking that came out of stanza or part 3, right? Where is the opposite there? Because this all sounds good, right? So here we get it. We get a little bit stronger, and in some cases rather strong, right? Battles, the horrors of fratricidal war, ill-doing or loss or lack of money, depressions or exaltation. So, right, these are things that are legitimately bad and possibly you might say evil, I guess, or depending on how you have your metaphysical stance towards them. But anyway, he says, right, they come and go. They are not me. There's the capital M, me, to go with the I. That's been such a refrain so far.
And so, what is the me then? What is that which remains constant in this ship of Theseus? These good things happen, these bad things happen, these sort of manifestations or alterations of being happen. Yeah. Differing affective states or differing situations which produce differing affective states. But what is the me exactly?
It seems to be transcendent, right? It is a part, it stands, it's what I am, right? Amused, complacent, compassionating, idle, unitary, looks down, right? So it is, I guess I would say that transcendent, it somehow defies the problem of opposites, right? It's both in and out of the game and watching and wondering at it, right? So it's somehow that thing which observes, right? That low at its ease,
I witness and wait. No mockings or arguments. It seems to be, like you said, this seems to be awareness. Horace, the eye on the back of the dollar bill, that which takes in the information of the situation in order to transform it into known territory by means of the use of the logos or the rational intellect, the consciousness.
I don't know that it's entirely rational. Well, I guess it certainly includes the rational.
Well, I don't think this is saying that. I think this is the awareness that takes in the information that then the rational intellect needs to apply itself to. The logos then needs to apply itself to in order to transform that data into like known information, to process that information. I think this is that. I think this is the I, the awareness. I think this is the awareness that all conscious beings have that makes it so that what is the same in all of us is that which joins us together, which is the fact that we are aware and can experience these shared motivational and affective states with each other, and know that it's ultimately not when I feel good or bad that is me who I am, but the thing observing that, which is who I am. But there does seem to be sort of a tension there, right? The observation of what is happening transcendently while also experiencing the now. But I suppose what's not there is the quibbling, articulating aspect. He says, I have no mockings or arguments. I witness and wait. And so both of these aspects of being, the observational aspect as well as the sort of being in the now, the Dasein, being there aspect, as the Heideggerians would say, seem to be at play. Which is more me, or something like that, or is the combination of the two me, which I think is more likely.
Yeah, it seems to be a matter of self-definition in some way, and aligning your own definition of yourself with that greater self, which, right, stands and looks upon things and is not, moved, but yet compassionates with them. It's incredibly a grandiose sort of notion, but yet it continually is put in contact with all these simple everyday things, and is distinguished from other sorts of grandiose systems, right? Like linguists, contenders, right? Arguers, right? So.
Yeah, and it's Dantistic in the purgatorial aspect, in that in purgatory, Dante, you move forward and suffer during the day, but you reflect at night. So life has these sort of yin-yang, or light-dark, or movement and rest, systole and diastole aspects. And this last line in the third, or I guess it's technically the second stanza in 4, is both in and out of the game, and watching and wondering at it. So it's playing the game, but it's also out of the game analyzing it. Just like this sort of purgatorial motion in life. It's as if you have to be aware of the situation during the day, which is, I don't know, your conscious interactions or conscious actions, but also of you have to also reflect on them and the game at night, because your actions in the next day will affect and change the game, and you should perhaps, and this is just an addition, you should perhaps, if that's true, mold the game towards its ultimate conclusion or towards its best possible form. Perhaps that's a life as well, just to keep with the existential theme here, the being in the now aspect.
Yeah.
That when you're not in the now, it's because you're planning on how to shape the now.
Yeah, I think in terms of what he actually does, of course, is produce this song, right? This great song, and I take that to be the shaping that you're talking about. But we'll have to get a bit further on, I think, before we see more reflection on that actual process.
Fair point. Yeah. I'm very much an oarer still in the harbor with much water to cover here. Right. So perhaps this will end up being an embarrassing episode. Later on in my song with myself.
Yeah, well, we got through 4 of the 52 parts. That's not so bad.
Yeah, that's a month. That's not bad. January.
Right on.
All right, we're through January. Excellent. All right, well, this has been Night School 4. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Wes Schantz, on a Friday evening, and see you next time.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Thanks again.